What is going on? It is Daniel with Cuervo ATV, and today we are talking about operating temperature. So, our new gauge setup, these have been out for a little while now. Got some nice glow in the dark action going on, but let's get the lights on and talk. So, operating temperature is important for a lot of different reasons. And where do we start? So, Raptor 700 base, of course, that's kind of why we're here. But this applies to a lot of different engines and machines and basically everything that's fuel injected. And some crosses over to carbureted stuff. But mainly fuel injected, what we're talking about. And the reason I changed the screen on these gauges is too many guys are operating in the too cold range. Now with our early on fan control and the switch that goes on the back of here and the harness to control the fan early, we should always stay out of the red. The fan's going to kick on right about 200. If you're pushing the bike real hard and the fan is in a constant state of operation, you might get into the first black notch after the 200 there, or the one above it is unlikely. That's pushing into the 220 range. Unlikely, but it could get there as you heat soak and overload the coolant system. So possible, not a big deal. As we get into the red, that's where the factory fan's gonna kick on. So with this gauge setup and early on fan control, we shouldn't be seeing it go into the red. If it does, then we either need to back off, consider looking at tune-up, or operation and abuse. Got to look at that, or clutch heat or something else maybe coming into play. But the reason why we put the green window there is that is our operating temperature. So we need to be in the green on the temperature gauge. For one, as that gauge moves, that means that the thermostat is open. And you won't see much movement until we get into the toward 140, and then you'll see a quicker movement. That's because the thermostat is opening and allowing coolant to flow over the gauge housing itself. So why that's important? Why do we need a minimum operating temperature? That is because on fuel injected bikes, they have a coolant temp sensor on the cylinder head, and that temp sensor is telling the ECU what to do. So the ECU is monitoring the coolant temp sensor to do two different things, and probably a lot more, but two basic functions is one, fueling and timing. So on the fueling side of it, what happens is when the bike is cold, the engine goes through a startup procedure. So let's say when the engine is below, I don't know, probably 110 degrees, because you could have ambient at 110 degrees, but as it falls lower than that, like your startup, the necessary for the bike to start and run in 50 degree temperature versus 100 degree temperature ambient, that is going to affect startup parameters, meaning it's going to have different fuel requirements and different ignition timing requirements to have a successful and smooth startup and idle. What I like to just consider roughly as a cold start, or cold start range. So that varies all the way up into the ECU's only really looking at the coolant temp sensor on the head until it gets up into about 175 degrees where this green line is. And once we're there into the green, the engine is looking at all the other sensors. So on the 700, you don't have a whole lot of sensors on there, but it's going to use the map sensor input, the intake air temp sensor input, and the speed sensor input. It's going to start looking at those and using all those to run at the air pressure that you're at, meaning the density, altitude, or if you're at high elevation and it's hot, or high elevation and it's cold, or sea level and it's hot or cold, it's going to make the fueling adjustment and requirement based off of that. But it doesn't really start looking at those sensors until it is at that temperature. So why that's important? Well, each generation of Raptor 700 has its own unique ECU tuning of what the ECU is programmed to do. Sometimes good, sometimes bad, of what it does. So on the 06 to 14 generation, the first generation with the dual exhaust port, that generation bike, if the motor is below 170 degrees and you rev the bike, if you free rev it, or if you try to ride it, it tends to foul the plug. It's fouling the plug because it is in a high level of fuel enrichment, and it's also pulling timing. So that's a common deal. I get guys who travel hundreds of miles, come over here, and I put a plug in their bike and I send them on their way. And it's like, I'm happy to fix their bike and everything, but it's simply because they revved the bike when it was cold. So don't start the bike in your garage and rev it when it's cold. There's no reason to do that. If you're loading your bike on the trailer or on the truck in the morning, be mindful of it, because that also does happen a lot. Guys will come down to dyno tune or something. They loaded the bike early in the morning when it was cold, and it gets here and it won't start. And go and put a plug in it, it fixes it, gets it back running. Or they get to the dunes and the bike don't start. I'll get a call in the morning, hey, I'm trying to figure this out, blah, blah, blah. Like, it started this morning, and say put a plug in it, boom, on their way. Now 06 to 14, not, cold start fouling is about the extent of the issues with it. On that generation, you can, on the drag bikes, you can bypass the coolant temp sensor and not deal with overfueling on oversized injector. By bypassing it, it's tricking the ECU to tell it that the engine's at 190 degrees all the time. If that's interested to you, call me. We can discuss the usage of that. On the 15 and above, that doesn't work because the startup cold start fueling parameters or initial crank fueling parameters are different. So when the 15 and above bikes, or let's say 15 to 22, that ECU, it pulls a lot of fuel on cold start, which is very odd. That's what they did to get past emissions at the time. But it goes very lean. It's very lean, pulls timing out of it, and normally that's just more of a hard start issue. If we bypass the coolant temp sensor on that generation, it doesn't normally have enough fuel during cranking to start. It doesn't have like a prime pulse programmed into it, which would be an initial pulse of fuel prior to the engine running. So the bike won't start if you bypass it. Same deal, same temperature. It's seeing that 175 degrees plus that it needs. The issue of the 15 to 22 ECU is, and this is mostly prominent on bikes on E85 or potentially methanol. Don't do a lot of that here locally yet. But on the E85 bikes, and I had a customer come in today and we went over this on his build, is it will blow the head gasket. It'll lift the head, blow the head gasket because the engine is too cold. Basically, you can give it whatever term you want, but like cold misfires, not only incomplete combustion, but also lean. So if you have a bigger injector and you're in the cold start, it is substantially more lean than it is on a stock bike. So that kind of caters toward that problem with E85 on a bigger injector. It's a bigger percentage of change that happens in that cold start. So what that means is, well, get the bike up to temperature. Let it heat soak. Don't worry about getting it too hot if you have it early on, because it's going to hit 200, drop to 185, and bounce in that window. But what happens with those particular bikes is, especially E85 stuff, is you run it, you let it sit, you see somebody you want to go race or take off with the group, and your bike's not up to temperature. And then if you push on it, it's extremely lean on the tune, and the timing requirements are substantially different, and it lifts the cylinder head with no other reason or damage or understanding of why. Just look everything over, it looks great, but it lifted the head. So a little bit of a ramble here, but there's kind of a lot of information in just such a simple thing. Getting up to proper operating temperature, besides the piston warming up and cylinder head and complete burning and everything else, the simple fact that you can cause yourself problems and headaches just by not being up to temperature. Regardless of if it's good on the piston or bad, or your oil's up to temperature, all those things, you do still need to be up to temperature to make the ECU happy, to make everything run properly along with what the proper tune-up on your bike is needing and wanting to be in your operating tuning. So last part is the 23 and above ECUs. Now, we haven't done a whole lot of digging on those ECUs as far as being problematic. They do have their own issues that we talked about in the another video, or talk about them cutting off when you let out of the throttle quickly and pull the clutch. But the 23 and above ECUs they fixed the problem with the cold start. So it's less of an issue on the 23 and aboves having a huge variance. You still need to get into operating temp. So if you have one of our gauges, and to wrap this up, wait till it's in the green to rev your bike or run the bike or do anything there. If you get into the red, back it off, see how it operates from there. If it wants to stay in the red, then we need to look for potential problems, checking coolant level and fan operation and tune-up head gasket. So, all right, that is it. I hope that helps. Simple issue that I haven't really talked about before, but the ECU needs to see the proper coolant temp sensor operation. That is it for today, and we will catch you on the next one.